organized by the Initiative and the Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature. My name is Cristina Signoli, and I am the program manager of the Offshore and Nature portfolio at the Renewables Grid Initiative. Today, we will dive into how to enhance the marine life around the subsea electricity grid, but not just this, in the Dutch North Sea. Let me tell you a couple of words about who we are. So the Renewables Grid Initiative is a collaboration of climate and environmental NGOs and the transmission system operators from across Europe. We are today 26 members who work together to develop an environmentally sound grid infrastructure for the integration of renewables. A couple of years ago, we started a collaboration project called the Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature. This was established along with industry, wind industry representatives, transmission system operators, and NGOs to collaborate on the deployment of offshore renewable infrastructure hand in hand with the protection of the marine ecosystems, so that we work on finding solutions to make this process at the speed that is needed, but also, of course, taking care of the conservation and restoration objectives. What is a nature inclusive design? We have decided to start a series of webinars. So this is the second that we are conducting this year on the nature inclusive design, which is one of the solutions that we have identified as a key solution very early in the establishment of the Offshore Coalition. In one of the deliverables of this diverse group of stakeholders, which is a discussion paper called the Key Essential Environmental Concept Applied to Offshore Renewable Developments, we have identified a common definition of the concept, which is that the nature inclusive designs are options that can be integrated in or added to the design of an anthropogenic structure with the aim to enhance the ecological functioning. So there is a component of enhancement. There are many nature inclusive design measures. Here in this infographic that you can see, we have identified some of the examples that's collaboratively with all the ocean members, which can be applied in offshore renewable infrastructure in the North Sea. It's very important to notice that measures need to be considered on a site by site basis, so that this really the context is key and is very important. Here we have just representing some of the examples that you will be hearing more in this webinar. You have heard in the previous webinars, but you will still hear in the next webinars to come. Now, since I'm mentioning the previous one, I'm just spending a couple of words. We have started with the first webinar on this topic on 2020, and actually with the same speakers, organizations that actually are present here today, so that today we can also check on the progress of what is happening in the last 2 years. And the first one was actually with the Rich North Sea program, but also with TenneT. Then the second webinar that we did on this series was actually in this January with Elia, the Belgian TSO operator, and this was on the early planning for a nature positive contribution to the offshore electricity infrastructure. So if you have missed those opportunities, you find here the links, but you will also hear more than in the chat from my colleagues. Now, before we move on and we dive into the topics, just a few housekeeping rules. I'm sure that you're all very familiar with this, but please mute your microphone. Please also stop your video. Not the speakers, of course, but also the participants. I will ask to put your video on again when we will have the discussion after the presentation. Raise your hand to ask a question or write it in the chat. So the question will be postponed after the two presentations. So just bear with us and you can start writing the questions in the chat, and then I will call each of you to ask your questions actually to the speakers in person. Now, without delaying further, our speakers today. So we have Eline van Olsen, sorry for the pronunciation. So Eline is the marine ecologist at the Rich North Sea program. And then we have Annemiek Hermans, and she's a marine ecologist at TenneT. Now, we started with the first presentation from Eline, so lessons from the 3 years in the field, the nature enhancement in offshore wind farms. And Eline, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just see if I can put my presentation up there. There we go.
Perfect.
I think that's also the right page to start on. I hope everyone can hear me well. And good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to see so many people interested in offshore wind and nature enhancement. And I actually see a lot of familiar names here in the room, but I can't see all of you, so excuse me for that. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eline van Olsen. I'm a marine ecologist and I work for the Rich North Sea. And the Rich North Sea is a program. And in November 2020, which now seems like ages ago, we did a similar webinar actually as today, where Annemiek and I both told you about our projects and our plans. And today I will be telling you a little bit about the Rich North Sea in the past 3 years and the lessons that we learned during that time. And I'm sure a lot of you here are already familiar with the program, but for those of you who are not, don't worry, I will give you a little bit of an insight into who we are and what we do. So the Rich North Sea program is part of the North Sea Foundation and Natuur en Milieu, a Dutch nature and environment foundation. And it's funded by the Dutch Postal Code Lottery, and it started in 2019. And this year is actually the last year of our program. And as you all know, offshore wind farms, they offer opportunities for enhancing North Sea biodiversity by offering protection in the form of exclusion of other activities such as bottom trawling, but also by adding hard substrates such as scour protection. And both soft sediments and hard substrate communities are really given the opportunity to develop. And the mission of the Rich North Sea here is to create resilient marine life and options for improving biodiversity as the new standard in the construction of offshore wind farms. To be able to do this, we entered into partnerships with stakeholders from the wind industry and the infrastructure to create offshore nature projects together. And here on the slide, you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but you can see a couple of our partners and stakeholders that we work with. We work together with scientific institutes, government, NGOs, and companies, and we really want to create a ripple effect. Oh, there we go. Already told you that. Our mission really hasn't become less relevant over this 3 years. The goals for sustainable energy are keeping on rising. And the current outlook for offshore wind is a 40-fold increase by 2050. I'm just going to say it again, 40-fold. It's incredible. It's an unprecedented growth. And I think this image really shows it nicely, where you can see 2020, 2030, and 2050, and the global targets. And it's just, I mean, 2020 is really nothing in comparison to what we're building towards. In the Netherlands, the goals for offshore wind have doubled in the past 3 years. But that's not the only thing that's changed during this time. Actually, a lot has changed in 3 years. And it's becoming increasingly clear that the energy transition and the nature transition are really intrinsically linked to each other. Both nature restoration and sustainable energy production are gaining momentum. So I put down some examples here. Of course, we have the upscaling of the offshore wind ambition, but there's also been other activities, such as the launch of the Coalition for Offshore Energy and Nature, which hosts this really cool webinar. But also the EU biodiversity strategy and nature restoration regulation, for example. We've really seen the focus shift from pure energy production to not only mitigation, but also to restoration, both in science, NGOs, as well as in industries and government. We've seen this in the first nature inclusive tendering procedure in the Netherlands, where one tender was really focusing on ecology to gain points, and this was a unique new development. But we've also seen it in the Netherlands, where the North Sea Agreement was signed, really underlying the importance of cooperation to reach shared goals and really work together. And we've also, of course, seen more and more pilots for nature restoration, which is always a good thing. I think I already mentioned this one. There we go. But especially during these times of growth, quite turbulent times, in which a lot of progression is made, I always think it's important to once in a while take a step back and see where we came from. And what are we trying to restore in the North Sea, and how far back goes human use in our own North Sea? Well, the last question is actually quite easy to answer, because humans were already roaming the Dogger Bank before it was a bank, before there was even a sea out there. And the North Sea has never been without people. I'm sure you're all familiar with pictures like these, but they really give us a glimpse into the history of our sea, from open plains with woolly mammoths to whales traveling the Dutch coast, to large ships exploring the open sea and small fishermen earning a livelihood. What we can't deny, however, is the change. The change in the North Sea, which it has seen over the past 200 years or so, where habitats have really changed and disappeared, and large fish species have become extinct. And I think pictures like this, where you see, for example, tuna fish in Germany and Atlantic halibut in the Netherlands, these types of fish are really very rare or extinct from our North Sea right now. Change and human use both always have been a part of the North Sea, but since the Industrial Revolution, change has really become well, extremely fast, and habitats and species have really been degraded. And this is what we're working with now. It's one of the smallest seas in the world, but it has the highest use. And it ranges from oil and gas extraction to cultural heritage, from shipping to fishing to recreation, and basically everything in between. And nature has sadly not really benefited from this use so far. Goals are not reached, and we're still really struggling to balance human use and a good environmental status. And this table is actually from the MSFD, so the Marine Strategy Framework Directive assessment for the Netherlands. And I think you don't even have to read it, just look at the colors, and I think it says quite enough. However, the balance in itself is really, it's so important. And if we want a healthy ecosystem with a highly complex food web and high biodiversity, we really need to tip the scale towards restoring the system and also offsetting negative effects. However, we're still aiming to increase human use of the system with the unprecedented growth, of course, of offshore wind. So how can we restore nature while still increasing the use? So impacts need to go down while the ecosystem has to recover. And this is quite a complex question, of course. So back to the rich North Sea. What did the rich North Sea do in the past years to help reach this goal and to reclaim the balance? Well, we started 5 different nature enhancement projects in offshore wind farms in the Netherlands. And you can see that on the map, which is shown here. And all the little stars are offshore projects in offshore wind farms. We joined scientific projects with research institutes and with other stakeholders. We investigated production of flat oysters for use in restoration projects. And of course, we try to influence national government to really work towards a more nature-inclusive design of offshore wind development. And all of our findings will be presented in an online environment, the toolbox, which is currently still under development, but stay tuned for that. And we actually learned a lot during our project. So I will shortly dive into that. Actually realizing nature enhancement projects in an offshore environment, it's quite hard. It's difficult. If you don't own or create a wind farm, it can be quite challenging. Working in an offshore environment in itself is hard. It's both on paper and in practice. For example, before going in the field, there's a lot of paperwork in the form of, for example, work method statements, cooperation agreements, licensing, certification, assessments, budgets. I mean, I could go on. And current legislation doesn't always make it easy to work offshore. And it can actually work to hamper nature enhancement projects. And this really is a problem. And once you're finally clear to go into the field, there's factors such as the weather, seasickness, communication, failing equipment, and there's a lot to deal with in the field. All in all, setting up and executing an offshore nature enhancement project really takes a lot of effort, but also a lot of time, because just the planning and the placing, it can take a lot of time. And of course, after installation, the project needs to be monitored. Data needs to be analyzed and processed. And at the end of the project, things might also have to be removed from the project location. So you also have to think about decommissioning. And all of this also brings high costs. Just renting a boat, for example, to get to your location offshore can already be very expensive. By working together, so combining manpower and equipment, some of these hurdles can be taken. And well, we've managed in the end to create 5 offshore projects and an offshore test site. So these things are not insurmountable, but they are issues to think about. And what do we actually need? Given the difficulties in setting up nature enhancement projects, but also the changing focus, both nationally and internationally, towards ecology and offshore wind. What do we need to make nature enhancement and restoration more accessible and attainable, and maybe even ingrain it into all new offshore wind farms? We need to speed up. And this sounds easy, but it's actually quite hard. The development of nature enhancement and restoration needs to go as fast as the outgrow of offshore wind. Well, and you've seen the goals. Maybe even faster, because nature is already lagging behind a little bit. So this is really is a challenge in itself. We need to sort out who's going to pay for all of this. As we're working in an already degraded system, who's responsible now for patching it up again? Is it just the new player in the field, or is it, well, people from history who are not here anymore? Is it all users in the sea? We really have to think about that. We also need to make nature-inclusive designs easy to incorporate, both during and after the construction of wind farms. And right now we see that if you look at after the construction, it can be quite difficult. So we really hope we can make it a standard part of the construction of new offshore wind farms. Legislation should be supporting and also stimulating really nature enhancement and innovation. And it shouldn't put a brake on things, which currently it can actually do. And of course, science. We have to go fast, but sometimes we do need a proof of concept. And this really doesn't mean that we can't do anything before having proof that it actually works. But it also doesn't mean that we should forget about proper monitoring and research. And finding the balance here is really crucial, or either the energy transition or the nature transition will suffer. And this also is quite a difficult thing to achieve. International knowledge sharing, well, I don't really think that this one needs explaining, because we call it in Dutch, it's an open door. And this is also a really important one, a holistic vision for North Sea nature. What do we think is a healthy North Sea? Discussion on that, on what we create, they have been really ongoing and very strong the last couple of years. What are we working towards, and is creating new habitats in places where it wasn't before, is it a good thing or not? And we really need to create a holistic vision which looks further than the current MSFD goals and other frameworks that are currently in place. So unfortunately, we learned more than only finding out that offshore work can be quite difficult. And here are some crucial learning points and messages that I would like to give to you to take home. And the first one, of course, is that the nature enhancement works. It really, of course, depends on what you want to achieve. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is that it can really work. Even in small pilots, we see almost direct effects, which is very encouraging and very positive. Both active and passive enhancements are needed to restore North Sea nature. And with passive, we mean really nature protection. So doing nothing is also doing something for nature. And accelerating the protection of underwater habitats really is crucial in supporting a healthy ecosystem. For optimal results, project needs to be large scale, both inside and outside offshore wind farms. And even pilot projects should be aimed at the large scale to both create a more realistic view of what's possible, but also to gain maximum impact. And really the only way to do this and to keep up the pace is learning by doing and adaptive management. It's really the only way that we can keep up with current ambitions. So I think this is a really important one, also in legislation. So, and this might be the last year of the Rich North Sea in its current form, but we're not done yet. It's only January, and we're still working on a lot. We're working on the toolbox, so stay tuned for that for later this year. We'll also keep on influencing politics and legislation. We really try to keep the pace up, and we really encourage the creation of a holistic vision. And we will also work on this ourselves as well. Of course, our projects are still running. So we want to keep on learning by doing. And of course, we really want to share our findings. And the only way we can do it is doing it together. I think that's one of the main and the most important thing I want to share with you as well. And I think that is also a great bridge to go to the next presentation, to Annemiek. I hope I've given you a little bit of an insight into what we've been doing and what we are still doing. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Celine. So before I pass the floor to Annemiek, Annemiek, you can also start sharing the screen. But I think that's, first of all, congratulations, because this is a concrete example of concrete collaborations on projects. So that's actually developing the energy infrastructure along with measures that can not just reduce, but actually enhance biodiversity is possible. So first of all, and is learned by doing. And adaptive management are two key concepts actually that we will need to implement now on all projects. And how do we share these learnings, and how actually we leverage on this learning maybe can be part of the conversation and discussion then with the others. Invite all the participants to start thinking about the questions, so that then we will be ready for the discussion afterwards. Now, without further delays, then I pass now the floor to Annemiek. She will guide us through the nature inclusive design for the offshore grid and the experience of TenneT. Annemiek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Eline, for just setting the scene so properly. Many of your lessons learned really resonated with our experiences at TenneT. My name is Annemiek Hermans, and I have been with TenneT. I'm a marine biologist I've been with TenneT since 2018 and aiding in making sure we have a nature inclusive offshore grid. We actually also are part of the stakeholder group that Elina mentioned for the rich North Sea. And one of your lessons learned that particularly resonated with me was that we have actually tried to set up a project together for Borssele, Hollands for Borssele Beta, where we wanted to place artificial reefs, and due to legislation that didn't go through. So I'm very happy to hear that you are still following up on that to see if we can change that in the future. For now, just a moment for safety. I just quickly wanted to share this article from Forbes with you. That here you see images of brains. These are EEG brain scans, and in the top 4, you see a person that has been in a back-to-back meeting online, and in the top, in the bottom 4, you see a person that has also been in those meetings, but has had breaks in between. And the colors indicate the level of brain activity. And if you notice that the bottom one, the person who has taken sufficient breaks, has a lot less beta activity, which is an indicator for stress, than the one in the top, although they've been doing the same thing, just without the breaks. Just a quick reminder to take your breaks when you can. Now, TenneT is, we own a large part of the offshore grid. In the Netherlands, mostly AC connections, and in the western part of Germany, mostly DC connections, both offshore wind, but also interconnector cables. And expanding rapidly. This is just an overview of the projects that we're working on now. The main takeaway message here is that we have a lot of cables and a lot of projects going on at the same time. And that is also what I want to share to you today, because all those projects we want to execute following our sustainable strategy, where we look at, have a corporate social responsibility strategy that focuses on people, planet, profit. And especially for the planet part, what we do in terms of nature inclusive design falls into our nature, the nature aspect, where our goal is to have 0 impact on nature by 2030. So that is a main driver for our how we call it nature inclusive design for the offshore grid, but not the only one. There's international drivers, national and international drivers. We have the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, but of course the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but also the OSPAR Convention has many links. And in the national frameworks, we have the Aandeelhoudersbeleid Staatsdeelnemingen, which is a new nota that has been published last year, which states that the government wants to have all of the government-owned or state-owned enterprises need to work on to have a functioning CSR policy, which also includes a nature inclusive design or an aspect of nature in the policy of the company. So that is also now an important driver for us. And the development framework for the offshore wind from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate. So we feel, apart from our own social corporate responsibility driver, we also feel there's a lot of pressure from our stakeholders to make sure that we work on not only providing safe and reliable energy, but also in a sustainable way. Now, for TenneT, it's important to understand that TenneT is 100% state-owned, and therefore the government assigns our goals, so to say. And one of that is that we have to take as much as reasonably possible, taking into account nature inclusive design, if it's technically feasible, if the risks are in order, and make them project specific under local circumstances, but particularly the costs that have to be comparable to the wind park developers. If you take into account what Eline also mentioned, that there is a for Hollandse Kust West 6, there's now the nature inclusive design tender that we had last year. We heard of plans of spanning over 200 million of investments focusing on nature inclusive design. If you then translate that back to the development framework, and that the cost that we as TenneT can spend on making the offshore grid nature inclusive, then we're talking about significant investments. We've developed a standard set of nature inclusive design measures. For TenneT, we see our cable connection in 3 parts. We have the platform, which you see on the left hand, where we have fish hotels, artificial reefs, and eco-friendly scour protection. Then we have the cable connection until the landfall is where we have our eco crossings, where a cable crosses an already existing pipeline or electricity cable. It's being laid over the existing pipeline, and therefore comes out onto the seabed and is being covered with rock rating, which offers opportunities for nature inclusive design. And after our landfall, we have a small section on land, and then the land station. Since we spoke last in 2000, what was it? 20, I think. Then we spoke about our plans to place fish hotels, and now last year we've actually placed them. So they've been placed on Hollandse Kust Noord, where the jacket was put in place in November 2021. And here in the back, you can see a picture of one of the fish hotels, which is partly filled with dead oyster shells and partly with a clear area. The idea being that juvenile fish can shelter within the oyster area, and also the oysters themselves have been shown to provide good settlement substrate for other shellfish, and possibly the chemicals from the shells, they also attract other oyster species. And in the clear sections, there can be the small fish can forage. The small fish can forage without being eaten themselves. Now this sort of imitates a young reef, because we do recognize that in the end this will all be overgrown, but it will kickstart sort of this reef effect. And for Hollandse Kust Noord, we placed 3 of these units, which is a relatively small amount, but we are looking at how the installation process went, and we're monitoring not only the ecological success, but also the structural integrity of the fish hotels themselves and how they function in relation to the jacket. And when this is positive, we are our goal is to increase the number of fish hotels on the future jackets. We also monitor here. We take water samples for eDNA analysis, and we're planning to include the fish hotels when we do a visual inspection of the jacket with an ROV. We've also placed the eco crossings. They've been installed in the summer of 2021 and have been monitored for the first time this summer. Here you can see a couple of images. The idea from the eco crossings is that the top layer, which is called the sprinkler layer, for that it is the Water Act that has regulated the D90, so the size of the rocks that are being deposited. So the rocks are small; they're about 8 centimeters. but we make them we place calcareous rock material, so they could be either a rest product of the marble industry, or they could be other types of calcareous rocks. And there also we believe that they provide a better settlement material than the traditional granite. That's our hypothesis. So with the first monitoring, you can see on the image the lighter rocks are the calcareous rocks, and the black rocks, they are the granite. Because the layer below, which is the armor layer, which is a lot bigger, about 40 centimeters in diameter per rock, that really comes through the sprinkler layer. So Bureau Waardenburg did the first monitoring this year, and the report has just come in, and there's no, it being the first year, we do see reef associated species already, but we are not, we cannot draw conclusions yet if the calcareous rock is better than the traditional granite. But we're going to follow up on the monitoring. Artificial reefs, they've been placed actually 2 days ago at Hollandse Kust West. Hollandse Kust. No, also Hollandse Kust Noord, sorry. Where they've been placed on a frame to assist with easy placement. This has been designed by Smulders, and they, the frame is sacrificial, so it stays in place, it's not coated. And we've also have, here you see a design with reef balls. And again, just a small amount relatively, but in order to see how they function, and they're being placed on the scour protection of the jacket, because we don't have a permit to place it within the safety zone, so directly on the sediment. Sorry. So these are just a couple of examples of what we've done so far. What I wanted to share with you is that, so we don't place them themselves, we asked our contractors to do it. And we went a bit through a transition. In the beginning, we had NID criteria. We said to tenders, okay, we really want this, just you can earn points or a fictive discount on your tender price if you come up with good ideas. And that worked relatively well. But that was still where we're in a relatively comfortable position, where many people wanted to make our cable connections or place our jackets. But then we went over to include nature inclusive in the basic design, and it was the same thing. But then we said to the contractors, you can build for us, but then you have to have these. You have to include the fish hotels and the ecological scour protection. But there's been such an acceleration, as Elina also told us, that now we have so many connections that need to be built that we are no longer in the lead, but the market is in the lead. The availability of the materials is in the lead, and so we are now going from that we just don't have enough. We have to work with parties that come from different backgrounds that might have not yet had the most experience in nature inclusive design. So we've gone towards a contractor journey where with all of the different parties that we're working with, we see at what level of nature inclusive design knowledge and experience they are, and we work together to get to the level that we want to be operating at, but also have making sure that our contracts allow for flexibility, because we're now making contracts, for example, for 14 platforms over 20 years. So we want to make sure that we have that flexibility, that if our knowledge and not only our knowledge, but the international knowledge base on nature inclusive design grows, that we can still incorporate that newly acquired knowledge in our contracts. And that takes a lot of interdisciplinary discussions, because it's not only marine ecologists, but also our technical team, legal team, purchasing. There are many different people involved. The last thing I wanted to let you know is that that's also had implications for our monitoring program. First, we did one-off monitorings. We just replaced something, and then we had, for that project, we tendered, and we got a party that did the monitoring, and then we got some results. But because we have so many nature inclusive design options set up and going to be rolled out over the years, that is no longer the way that's going to become too costly. So now we want to scale up the monitoring program and make sure that we have a comparable, that we use parameters that are comparable for all our different nature inclusive design programs, and that all of our monitoring is done in the same way, which is more cost efficient and also makes the quality higher because we can compare the results. And for that, we've been in close contact also with other parties to make sure that the way we get our monitoring results are comparable to the way that they have done it. And that will ultimately lead to the question, are we successful, and are the investments that we do, are they comparable, or are they worth the nature that they result in, or should we adapt our strategy? I hope this helps you a little bit, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick, for the very interesting presentation. And also we could track, actually, as I was saying the beginning of the webinar, also the progress that since our first webinar in 2022 happened in both the Rich North Sea, but also in the measures that TenneT has implemented. So we have a couple of questions already, and we can now open the floor. So let me just remind you something that I did not remind from the very beginning, but this session will be recorded so that we can make also this then available to others after us as for all the other webinars. Now, if you all participants can switch the video on, it would be very nice so that we can have a discussion and we can see each other. Now, my very first question, so before we open the floor, so all participants can raise their hands. We have 2 questions in the chat, but maybe my first question to Eileen and to Annemiek, just to start to break a little bit the ice. So we have heard about pilot projects, so that we have pilot projects. We have heard about learning by doing, adapt.
Is it just me, or is Christina freezing up? And Roland as well? Yes. Our hosts are really freezing up. Okay. Maybe we can see if there's a question in the chat, and we'll pick that up first, and then we can go back to the hosts. Because I already see 2 questions in the chat. Oh, Christina's
Can you hear me
back.
now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we had a problem with the connection, I think, in the office, so very sorry.
There you go, no worries.
So yes, we have a couple of questions, and I was just talking to myself, but I will repeat it again, the question. So the question was, so we have heard about pilot projects and the importance of pilot projects, also large-scale pilot projects, in order to learn and in order then, I mean, to be able then to implement more of these measures. Although we have said that this is, I mean, case by case, we have to look at the project specifications because this cannot be generalized. But now my question to you to open the discussion is, maybe it's a bit provocative, but is a standardization of making nature inclusive design part of an energy infrastructure feasible and desirable? So I'm just
shall I go first?
So Eileen, you can go first, then Annemiek, and then we open the floor to everyone.
Yeah, of course, I'm the NGO and Annemiek is the TSO, so but I would say yes and yes. I think it's both desirable and achievable, especially with the low-hanging fruits, so to say. So a lot of the things that Annemiek explained about changing the scour protection, about really changing small things about the infrastructure that you can quite easily do when installing them. I think these are really, really achievable. And I think if you do it on a large scale, the impact can also be quite high. So yeah, I'm all for that. I'm very positive. But the thing is that you still have to look at specific project locations for your add-ons, because I also think these are necessary. So yes, you can standardize quite a lot and achieve quite a lot, but I don't think that's enough. We don't have to stop there, but we also have to look at case-specific locations as well.
Thank you, Eileen. Annemiek, from the TSO perspective.
Yeah, I agree with Eline. I feel that currently nature inclusive design options are still relatively expensive. That is partly due to the fact that they are small scale, and also that we still have to learn how to do them as cost efficiently as we can. But I really feel that there's a very large driver now for offshore wind to do these nature inclusive design options, and that allows us time and money to learn. But what I'm hoping is that what we learn from including them in offshore wind, we can ultimately also do nature. It will then probably not be nature inclusive design, but more nature enhancement in, for example, closed areas where you might have a larger effect. So I really hope that we can also transfer the lessons learned to other areas of industries, but also to marine protected areas.
Thank you, Annemiek. So this was a way to now we dive into the practices actually that you have both presented, because we have some very interesting questions from the participants that want to understand and to learn more from it. So I'm going to call so those that wrote the question, and you can also jump in. I'm going to read it, but you can also jump in and then in the conversation. So one of the question is about the adds-in, so the measures that are applied. In particular, this is a question that is referred to, that is for Annemiek, and it's about the hosting frame for the artificial reefs. So the question is it meant to rust and deteriorate? How is viewed from a permitting and environmental perspective? Because of course, then we have also another little infrastructure, in a way we can see it, I mean, that needs to be included. So first question, is it meant to rust and deteriorate? And second, how does is it dealt with within the permitting and environmental procedure and perspective?
Yes, thank you, Paul, for your question. And this frame is indeed intended for to be sacrificed. We do sort of hope that by the end of life, we will still be able to hoist them out with the system, but we won't be certain. Because it's not coded. So it's not going to be, when we roll out more of these units, these were just 12 in total, but then we aim to find a different way of placing them to reduce the amount of steel that's being sacrificed. But for now, there was no issue with permitting, as in, well, basically everything offshore is well, steel. And I think that the coating has a more detrimental effect because we're basically just pouring paint into the sea than the steel itself. But I think if you're going for large scale restoration, less steel would be better. I hope this answers your question, Paul.
Thank you, Annemiek. And so Paul, in case, give us a sign. So we have another question now, and the question is always about the measures that we have heard from, and the question is from Robert Fennelly from AirGrid. Hi, Robert. So here, it's a little bit about the process. So the fish hotels, for instance, and the eco crossings, were they informed by other, I mean, from what and where, or were they designed as a result of primary research? So what is the process? I mean, when you start with the pilot, like the fish hotels, I mean, how do you start?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That's an excellent question. Well, we do try to select our nature inclusive design options based on the relatively limited scientific research that's available. And the fish hotels, they have been designed by Eco Ocean. That is a French NGO, and they have made biohuts, as they call them, in harbor areas. So relatively sheltered, where they've shown that they work. They hadn't had them in an offshore environment, which is as harsh as our North Sea. So that part is structurally, as an engineering, from an engineering point of view, it is more challenging, but also we weren't quite sure if it would work for offshore species as well. But they made a prediction that with this design we would be able to attract target species. And for the eco crossings, there is a research from Wageningen University that shows that calcareous material, specifically for bivalve bivalves, so mussels and hoe heet die andere, and oysters, that it attracts larvae. It's not been published and it's not concrete yet, but there were enough leads that prompted us to try it. So it's a bit of both, a bit of luck and a bit of preliminary research.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Sure.
Because I think Robert here really is touching a very important point in that this is also learning by doing. And there's evidence that it's working, but it hasn't been done on this location, on this scale, with these exact specifications. And I think it's a very I think it's very encouraging that this is happening, because it's pretty much your only way forward, to just do it and see what happens. And I think sometimes ecology can be very complicated, but sometimes it can also be very simple. And you can really make it very flat and say, okay, everything we put into the sea acts as a sort of reef, and it attracts certain species. So this will definitely do the same. And what species exactly it will attract, well, that's up to the monitoring to see. But it will definitely do something. And I think with these types of measures, there isn't a lot that can go wrong. So it's very important to keep doing this and keep on learning. And if it ends up not really being beneficial, then we will know that as well.
Thank you, Ellen, for this specification. And also, since you mentioned about the importance of the monitoring, so we have also a question about this from Rocco Carella. I mean, the question is for Annemiek, but I think, of course, both can answer to this. He says that there is some doubts about the all-in-one monitoring program, since the different wildlife groups are well-known, need different monitoring protocols. How to address this? Annemiek, you go first, and then from your perspective.
Thank you, Rocco. Well, I'm indeed very interested to hear what Eline thinks about this. What our starting points are is that we have a limited budget for monitoring. So we're looking at the common dividers that will give us the most information, sort of 80% of the information, and that would be eDNA. In combination with visual inspections. And I do feel that indeed, as you say, for different groups, you could add on to that to get more specific information, but that would also up the cost significantly. So that is why we've decided to focus on these two types of monitoring. But I think Eline has more experience with monitoring than myself. So what do you think, Eline?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. And the thing is that monitoring, we can make a really nice monitoring plan, and really, we can dream about things, but in the end, it has to be practical as well. And offshore monitoring just is very expensive, and it's also very difficult to rein. So there are only a few options. And especially if you go into an offshore wind farm, there's quite a lot of restriction there into what type of ship you can use, what sort of equipment you can hang overboard. You can't leave anything. It's quite restricting, actually. So the more you can combine, the better it is. And of course, you can't monitor birds by doing eDNA water samples. So you have to be a little bit creative. But I think as soon as you can combine combinations or monitoring techniques, you should grab that chance. And the more it covers, the better. But of course, well, we use eDNA monitoring as well. And this type of techniques, it's still in development. But it's one of the best types that we have right now. So we're making use of it. And also using ROVs, for example, to take underwater footage. It has its limitations, but it's what we have right now and what we can use. So we will use it. Does it answer your question a little bit?
So if we do not hear, it did.
Okay.
I'm sure. So now there is another very interesting question, and it's basically about, so this is from Lee Vat. I hope the pronunciation is good. So here there are two aspects, because one question is what happens if we create a beautiful habitat at a cable crossing or via cable mapping, for example, and then a few years into operation we have a cable failure and we need to repair the cable, need access, and so what will happen? This is partially also related to another question, which is the overall question on the decommissioning. So what happens when we create an habitat, and then, I mean, are these measures meant to actually have a life cycle long as the life cycle of the infrastructure where they are applied to? And what happens? Are we leaving this structure there in order not to disrupt, I mean, the ecosystem that we have created? So I'm adding a little bit to the questions. Both of you can answer here. So who wants to go first?
Shall I go first again?
I think you had recently had a webinar on this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. If anyone is interested, we had a webinar on this, so go to our website and look for the decommissioning webinar. It will be online soon. But I think it's a great question, and I think what we really want to create with nature enhancement is a sort of overspill effect. So creating a reef or creating a suitable fish habitat really is only the beginning of nature restoration, and it should have an effect on not only that tiny little speck in the sea, but it should spread out. And maybe in the beginning it's just on that one rock, but maybe the reef will start forming itself and getting bigger and bigger. And I think in the end that's also the goal that we have to keep in mind. These type of actions should only be the beginning of something larger. So if you have to repair a cable and remove some rocks, well, yeah, then maybe you remove part of the reef you have created, but hopefully around there, species are already benefiting from it. So in the end, the greater picture is that it gets better, well, for the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think that we have a bury and forget policy. So ideally, we will not touch cables once they're laid until they're at their end of life. And of course, that doesn't always go through, but that is most of the cables so far, except most of the cables so far are doing well and are we actually can sort of forget about. So I think that the chances of this happening are present, but it does not it does not reduce the amount of benefit we can create for nature significantly, in my opinion, so far at least.
Thank you, Annemiek. This is also a very interesting point, because in the different sea basins there are also different ways that approaches to the decommissioning of subsea cables, so they should be removed, but this is not always the case. So this is also an interesting aspect to be further investigated. So we go to another question. I'm aggregating, so for the participants, I'm aggregating questions, so I'm not skipping yours, but I'm just trying to put them together. We have a question about from Antonius Emmanuel, I think. He's asking, are there other aspects or concepts than those presented of nature inclusive design related to the offshore grid connection system that you expect to become more relevant in the future? What about limiting the electromagnetic fields by eco-friendly cable routing, for example? Is this something that TenneT will be focusing on? So Annemiek, is for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonius. Yes, well, that is indeed a very interesting topic you touch upon there, because at TenneT we are looking at the effects of electromagnetic fields, and not only we, but there are we are working with a couple of TSOs now, and also with the Renewables Grid Initiative to expand the research that's been going on. There's attention for electromagnetic field effects in France. RTE is working on this. IR Grid is also having it as an important topic, and there are others as well. And there's research now coming in that certain species that might also be attracted by the nature inclusive design options. So reef-associated species like lobsters and crab might be affected by the electromagnetic field. So there might be sort of a confounding factor there. So far, that it looks to be happening only at levels that we are currently not seeing with the cables that we are building. So we're now focusing on AC cables, and so far we haven't seen any effects of electromagnetic fields. And for DC cables, for example, there's a quite infamous article from Kevin Scott on edible crab that we have in our North Sea, of course, as well. And that is being disturbed by electromagnetic fields, but those are not the levels that we're experiencing. So we are keeping a sharp eye on it, and it could be an issue in the future. For now, I feel that it will not affect the species we're targeting, but it is an aspect of interest. So a very important question, Antonius. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annemiek. So this provides also an overview of things that are moving. I mean, they are not still out there, but there is already movement behind the scenes on this, moving on these topics and going much deeper. I have then another questions about this time about always specific measures. And this is from PJ Stevenson. So PJ is asking, he would like to know more about how you mitigate the risk of alien invasive species using the hotels, eco-grassing and reefs that you want to attract native species. So how you mitigate the risk of alien invasive species. And I think that this is, I mean, of course, Annemiek, for you relevant, and Eileen, if you want also to complement on this.
Well, I think that is a significant risk, and thank you, PJ, for mentioning it, because it is something that is always should always be high on the agenda. There is, luckily, more research is coming out about the risk of invasive species and how to prevent it. You can work with the timing of the placement of your nature inclusive design. That works better with artificial reefs, where you have a bit more control than for example, fish hotels, which are part of your jacket. But also invasive species are mostly a risk in the upper part of the water column, where we are focusing more on the lower part. But I think Elina also is very familiar with this topic because of the recent. I forget the paper. It's from Belgium. Elina, do you know it? But do you remember it? The one that I think it's from Stephen de Graar. But
yeah,
I will
probably. Yeah.
Well, I will look it up.
Yeah, I think the thing that you mentioned is quite important, that we see more invasive species in the upper part of the water column. So the lower you work, well, the better it is, basically. And I also think that in an offshore environment, it's very, 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 very difficult, maybe even impossible, to really prevent invasive species from settling on your structures. Because if they're already there, then what are you going to do to prevent it? So I think the thing that we really have to do is monitor and see what happens. If the things that we're adding to our structures only attract invasive species, then we're not doing a good job. And that's a learning point, and we have to rethink our design. But what we see, well, in coastal sections, for example, but also on land, is that with most invasive species, at some point there's going to be an equilibrium in the ecosystem, and they can be really effective parts of an ecosystem as well. So having an invasive species in your system isn't always necessarily a really bad thing. The thing is that they shouldn't be they shouldn't be out-competing the native species, but we only know that once we start experimenting more.
There's also an interesting article on seeding. I've put it in the chat for you, PJ, if you're interested.
Thank you both, and PJ, I hope that this answered your question. Very good. We have now, it's a question, but it's from a different perspective. I mean, maybe it's similar to the one that I asked to you at the very beginning. So whether it's feasible and desirable, because here we have questions asking, so if it does not have an impact on the infrastructure, for instance, on the design of the infrastructure, should we be more ambitious? So, I mean, with actually foreseeing this adds-on, and then still we have other comments saying that in the Netherlands, we are more and more obliged to contribute to a positive biodiversity. What is really stopping you? Where is the obstruction to get going? What do you need? And this is maybe the next step. What do you need from home in order actually to make this at the scale that we are discussing about? I mean, the large scale that is needed. So this is again for both of you. So we go to another layer. So we also name, I mean, who can actually support this to move to the next step. I mean, to move also away from the pilot projects phase.
I think this is a super relevant question. Do you want to go first, Annemiek? Because I'm
go for it
again. I think it's really relevant, and it also touches upon one of the points that I made during my presentation. Is who is responsible, right? Who is responsible for the environmental status of our sea? Because I think it's obvious that the one who's responsible should pay, but we're still discussing about that. And in the meantime, we're building, and the system is still degrading. So it takes a lot of time. And I think we really have to put more pressure on that and say, okay, if we want to have more pressure on the system, we should also put more effort into restoration and into nature enhancement. And I think offshore wind can be a really nice, push out of the door, so to say, to get the ball rolling, because, well, in all fairness, it's going to be the largest player in the field. Even though it's the newest player, it's going to be the largest as well. And it offers us a lot of opportunities. But we shouldn't stop thinking about nature restoration within offshore wind farms. We should definitely also be looking outside of it and really looking at marine protected areas and active restoration outside of wind farms as well. And I think, funding should be both from industry who's using the sea, but also from governments and maybe even from other parties, because in the end, we are all using the ecosystem services which they offer, which is more than just energy and more than just food. It's also CO2 capture, for example, and it's recreation. It has intrinsic value. There's so much more. So I think, the responsibility should be shared as well, and so the costs should be shared too.
Yes, so responsibility and cost. Of course, we have also to make a distinction here, because we are aggregating the offshore wind farms and the grid, but I mean, of course, they are also subject to different remuneration and systems, so that we are also, I mean, the grid operators are state-owned, and so that, I mean, this is also goes into another direction, so that basically comes also back to us citizens, so paying, so increasing the cost, I mean, is a big issue. But this is a very interesting point. So, but we have to keep, I mean, also the two infrastructure as much as possible. There are differences between the two. But Annemiek, so from your perspective, then.
Well, I think that our government is doing an excellent job if you compare our the way that we, for example, have the first ecological tender, or ecological wind tender, and many countries, as my international contacts tell me, look towards the Netherlands as a sort of as a standard to raise up to in terms of nature inclusive design for the offshore industry. So I think that's something that we can be very proud of. But it is a fact that there's just our government's very complex. So there's a strong driver for nature inclusive design in one part, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the other parts are as well connected and have the same goals and are as well informed. So it could be that, for example, the Dutch Enterprise Agency or the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate, although it should be the other way around if you ask me. But in any case, that they have a very strong incentive for the offshore wind energy to be nature inclusive, but that people that are permitteers, people that are in charge of handing out permits for the Water Act, but also the Coast Guard, all the other parties that are involved, they might not be working towards the same end goal. So that could be that on the one hand, you're being pushed by the government to do something, for example, place reef balls in Borselen, and that from another legislative arm, you're being stopped because you will not get a permit based on the, well, in this case, the besluit algemene strekking. I don't even know what actually is a besluit algemene strekking. It's just such a generic term, but it prevented us from doing what we wanted to do. So my desire would be that the government does what she's already doing. They work very hard, they're very motivated, but it should be, ideally, there would be a bit more interdisciplinary and interdepartmental goal setting on this particular subject.
Thank you, Annemiek, and thank you, Lynn, for this insight. It's not an easy question, and I mean, of course, there are not easy answers to this, but I mean, it's very important. Yes, I mean, definitely also to talk about responsibility and who pays, and I mean, this needs to be furthered and detailed. I mean, if we want to move forward. So now I asked the participants: is there any other questions that I have missed or that you would like to ask now? So you can also raise your hand in case. So if I do not see this, so before we close, give me still 2 minutes. So first of all, I want to thank both Eline and Annemiek for the presentations, but also for the question and discussion, because it has been very informative. All the participants, I think, are very satisfied, they say, although there is a very last second question, well, which requires a bit of time, but
no, it doesn't. Scale, Jay.
So Jay,
larger scale, more.
So he says, what do you think is the most effective way we can measure the efficacy of nature inclusive design? So here, last statement from both of you.
Most effective way. Yeah, well, I agree with Annemiek wholeheartedly. More and bigger and larger scale, of course. But I also think we should be smart about monitoring. And I think this is a really important one because, for example, in the Netherlands, we have a monitoring program, but offshore wind farms are not part of that yet. And I think when combining monitoring things like that, you get a more of an overview instead of just looking at one small part of the sea. And I think to really see if an ecosystem is healthy or not, we need the holistic view. So the more we can combine, the better. And I also think that you should look cross-border with this. So have monitoring techniques, monitoring missions even, that go cross-border to really gain insight into ecological development.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent excellent statement. And what I also would like to, I think that the developments are going of monitoring techniques are going really fast, and especially eDNA is we are now just scratching the surface of what we can do with 2 microliters of water. I think within 5 years, every 6 months there are new genomes sequenced from species. I think within 5 years we would have a whole database full of North Sea species, and it would be so much easier to, even with degraded DNA, to get a complete picture of which marine animals are in your wind park and when and how old they are, and in which phase of their life, life, and we're just scratching the surface. So if you ask me, stay tuned, and we will have efficient and cheap and reliable monitoring just around the door.
So we are basically announcing that we will be doing another webinar very soon, so to check again the progress on all the projects. So we are doing this each 2 years at least. So thank you very much. No, we have maybe more of a consideration of from Eric Kugel, saying that we actually get permits to place all rigs, renewable platforms, and the complete wind farms, but artificial reefs are stopped by the regulator. And so that, I mean, this is a little bit of the overall contradiction, and really he hopes that this can be addressed in a way. So maybe this part, I mean, is more difficult than the entire part. Maybe do you want to comment on this, or just acknowledge that this is unfortunately how it is at the moment?
Yeah, I can only acknowledge it, and it's very frustrating that indeed oil rigs are built, and we're still drilling for gas, and in the meantime we can't place 8 artificial reefs around the platform. It's very frustrating. So I think the only thing that we can do is keep on lobbying towards a more nature inclusive approach for, well, complete North Sea development, and really look at it case by case, but also try to influence national and international legislation.
And also change is made by people, because if you look at what we've accomplished since the last time we met each other, 3 years, and I mean with we, I mean the whole community and all the green blue warriors that are working on this subject. And I think if we just keep pushing and have more people that are focused on this subject, and especially the Hollandse Kustwest Tender did that. It made from technicians, from legislative people, from people in purchasing teams. They made them part of the nature inclusive design army, of nature enhancement army that we are together. So I feel that yes, the energy transition is going fast, but we can also go fast if we just keep working at it every day a little bit.
Absolutely. So this is great, and I will say that also it's great that during this webinar we also have a commitment from another transmission system operators very great, that who will support. They will support the common evidence base by aligning on specifications and monitoring methods and sharing data. So this is also great news and confirmation during the webinar. So now, if there are no other questions, so here I thank both of you, Eline and Annemiek, and so the series of webinars will go on, so that, I mean, we will have the chance, not this year, but I mean in the coming years, then, I mean, to talk again about these programs. Before though I let you all go, I want to share just a little piece of information on some videos that we produce as RGI and the Offshore Coalition. That's our videos on the fish huddles, on the grid infrastructure. So there's an interview with Saskia Jarsman from TenneT, and then then we have also the Rich North Sea video with an interview with Marjolaine Kelder from Nature and Milieu. So that, I mean, the colleagues from Eileen and Annemiek that actually gave an interview to talk about these practices. So please have a look at these videos. Here you can also find the QR code to connect. Then last but not least, so we are doing a series of webinars on nature inclusive design. So far we have addressed both, but mainly the grid infrastructure, subsea cables, and we will be organizing very soon then a series of other nature inclusive design on the offshore wind infrastructure, so that we will have also our members, the wind developers, then presenting their measures. So stay tuned, and if you want to learn more about it, please do subscribe to our newsletter so that you can get all the updates from ERGIA and the Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature. So by thanking all of you, thanking the speakers first again for the very insightful presentations and discussion, and thanking all the participants, I wish you a very nice rest of the day. You will hear from us with the link to the recording of this video. And if you have any questions, just get in touch with us. So thank you very much, and have a very nice evening.